Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Breaking the Game podcast. And joining me as he does, every time is fellow co-host Austin Carr. How's it going, Austin?
Doing good, man. It's a good day. We had a finals closeout game last night. The Lakers won. It makes me happy. So,
Oh yeah, I know that you woke up a champion this morning, and I woke up still a loser. So I mean, one of us still got going on what we want, right? But congratulations to you and your Los Angeles Lakers. This is a big victory. I know that you probably couldn't be happier considering the circumstances that surrounded the team basically since the last offseason, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, good
definitely
deal.
Excited. Happy to see them win. Happy to see LeBron James get that fourth finals MVP. I know we're going to talk about that quite a bit, so I won't go into that too much detail right now, but can't be more excited.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, today is basically just a recap for you watching or listening now or later, right? We're just going to be recapping game 5 and 6, go over our initial thoughts for both games, and kind of from there, probably just be talking about what a lot of people are talking about. What does this win do for the legacy of certain individuals? And guess what? It's not just going to be LeBron James, although he will obviously be included. And, how does this impact the Miami Heat, if at all? So with that being said, Austin, do you want to go ahead and lead us into the Game 5 recap?
Yeah, for sure. Game 5 saw, a back and forth battle between Jimmy Butler and LeBron James, kind of went head to head, pretty much the whole game. And the Heat were able to come out on top in Game 5, 111-98. So actually, the final score wasn't even really that close. Was kind of surprised at that. Jimmy Butler, stole the show. He had 35, 12, and 11. 5 steals, 1 block, played, I think, all but like 90 seconds in the whole game. And Duncan Robinson, finally had one of his big 3-point shooting games. He hit 7 threes. He had 26 points. They had 4 other players in double figures. Kendrick Nunn showed up again. He's really returned to form these last few games from where he was, all season long. And so that was kind of nice to see him, get back in the swing of things. Both teams made 38 field goals. Miami shot one more attempt. So, from that aspect, it was pretty close. Miami was 21 of 22 from the line. The Lakers were 18 of 21. James had 2 of those 3 misses. Lakers were +6 on the boards, which has kind of been, a running theme in this series. +3 in steals, +2 in blocks, +10 in points in the paint. Miami was +5 in assists, +2 in turnovers, and +2 in fouls. Anthony Davis had 28, 12, and 3 for the Lakers, 3 steals and 3 blocks. His defense has been, impeccable most of the playoffs. He shot 60% from the field, 40% from 3, and 8 of 8 from the free throw line. Up until that point, he still has yet to miss a free throw in the finals. And, I kind of felt like this was going to be LeBron James's statement game on this series and on this championship. When he had 40 points. When he started hitting threes in the first half, I kind of felt like, here it goes.
Yeah.
This is that game where he's going to, kind of put his mark on things and cement it in his legacy, kind of. But give credit to Jimmy Butler. He didn't let him have that moment in Game 5. So,
yeah, absolutely. There were, just a couple key takeaways for Game 5 that I wanted, to go over. Right. Obviously, Dwight Howard is doing what I call gooning all night. Right, like just being a goon.
Right.
Should have been ejected in my eyes, especially now that they're ruling flagrant fouls. Like intention has really nothing to do with it anymore. Like you can unintentionally draw a flagrant now.
Right.
And early in the game he was kind of hand jousting with Bam Adebayo, trying to get under his skin. And you saw, before an inbounds, they were kind of like just swatting each other, like kind of doing the It Man routine with each other, right? And then we saw, he and Jimmy Butler get into it, and then fast forward a few plays later, he kind of clubbed Jimmy Butler, and I felt like all he was going to do is just end up hurting somebody, coming down the stretch of that game. Watching the game and watching it unfold, it felt like it was just a cut and paste of Game 3. And, we saw Jimmy Butler have another triple-double. You mentioned earlier that Duncan Robinson unlocked his game. He accounted for half of Miami's three-pointers in this game, which is just incredible. We're starting to see memes and Twitter handles circulating about how he's surpassed Klay Thompson as the best catch and shoot player in the NBA. I'm not going to say that he's doing that, but when you go over things like, he was half of his team's 3-pointers, he hit 7 in a finals game, like that's pretty good, right? But we've seen players kind of
when he hits 7 and a quarter, then we can talk about it, or 7.5,
right? Yeah, but
Klay Thompson can do some things that I've never seen before.
Correct. Yeah.
I do want to correct myself real quick. I did say the score was 111 to 98. It was 111 to 108. I thought that sounded wrong. So I just wanted to clean that up real quick. My bad.
Oh yeah, that was a typo on my part.
All good.
I changed the 8.
I just wanted to make sure I corrected that. So
no, I appreciate you doing that. Right. Cool. Going down the stretch too, though, Miami in this Game 5 victory, there was only one player that played that was not in double figures, and that was Andre Iguodala, who had 0 points, but he's in there for a different reason, right? He's a defender, strictly a defender. Yeah. The next point I want to make is that LeBron James had an amazing game, right? And at this point, even at the conclusion of Game 5 and a loss, I don't know how you make the case for anybody else for Finals MVP, right? If the Lakers did close it out, obviously if the Heat were to, come into Game 6 and then force a Game 7 and win, obviously it's Jimmy Butler's, right? But I don't think you can award Finals MVP to a losing player against LeBron James, who, if you were ever going to do it,
would have been the one.
Correct. Yeah. So you can't do that to LeBron James, right? And then the last point that I wanted to make in Game 6, right? Danny Green, again, we talked about this last night in our post game that we did with a couple guys from Off the Ball. Anybody who's dealing out death threats over a basketball game is just a terrible type of way to live, and I don't know how you can kind of do that. But
it's not anywhere near as important as life and death. It means absolutely nothing in terms of the grand scheme of things, really.
Yep. And I just want to say to my buddy Dre checking in for the show, just, hey, what's up, Dre? Appreciate the love and support, brother. Appreciate the love and the support. But Danny Green was 37% from the floor that night. Alex Caruso was 33%. Kyle Kuzma was 30%. Playoff Rondo was 14%. Dwight Howard and Markieff Morris combined for 0 of 3. Outside of LeBron James and Anthony Davis, and then all of a sudden, KCP is starting to get a little bit more shine than I thought that he was being neglected of. Right. Outside of those three, who do you turn to? And those questions were answered, a good bit in the next game, Game 6, Austin, where we had Goran Dragic return to last night's victory for the Los Angeles Lakers over the Miami Heat. Goran Dragic did return to play.
Impressive.
It was very impressive considering it was a plantar fascia injury, which a lot of people, including myself, were skeptical that he would come back at all.
Me too.
Even if he wanted to, but he did make the return.
If anything, I felt like it would be just like, he came out there for a minute to kind of maybe, pick up his team spirits or something, or give him something, to kind of rally around, something like an emotional uplift or something, but not really actually be able to contribute the way he did.
Yeah, absolutely. And we mentioned about how up until this point, Frank Vogel's been kind of stubborn with his lineups and adjustments, at least with his rotations, defensive schemes and things like that. He's done a pretty good job, right? But in lineup wise and rotation wise, he hasn't really been kind of, he's been reluctant to make any decisions as far as changing his rotations.
Right.
But I think he finally heard me, because I'd been clamoring for Caruso to be in a starting lineup. And then in Game 6, the closeout game, he not only starts over Dwight Howard. Howard only plays in like 2 minutes. He's like playing like into the rotation minutes, like blowout minutes. And I wasn't expecting all of that, but I did think that Caruso should have got the start over Dwight Howard. What did you think about, Vogel adjusting his rotation for this closeout game?
Well, I was surprised to see it, but I do think it worked. I think it was a good move. I think one of the things I'd kind of talked a lot about was how the Lakers had kind of been living behind the 3-point line the last few games, and that's not really their game. They usually attack the basket. They like to get going towards the rim, draw a lot of fouls. They made 40% of their points from in the paint, so tops in the league by far. And just with Dwight Howard and Anthony Davis both in there, it kind of clogged things up. I think putting Caruso in there really opened up a lane for them to be able to attack. And, we saw it last night in Game 6 when the Lakers attack and they get going on offense, their defense picks up. The effort just across the board goes up like insane amount. It's crazy to see the difference in how aggressive they are from like Game 5 to Game 6. It seemed like a different team. They swarmed the ball all over the court. And I think, the way they started the game with that lineup change, I think it really kind of necessitated all of that. And that's kind of, I think it was a great move in my opinion. And, it really got them going from the opening tip.
Yeah, and I agree. It was a great decision. I'm glad that I came up with it, and thank you, Frank, for listening to me. Finally.
Yeah, I almost forgot to give you your credit for that, man. Great coaching.
All right, I wasn't gonna let you forget to give me credit.
Well, good. There you go.
I appreciate it. Speaking of giving credit, LeBron James was incredible in this closeout game. He had 28 points, 11 assists, 10 rebounds, 1 steal. So he's still, even though he's not Anthony Davis on the defensive end right now, he's not being paid to be Anthony Davis. That's what he's there for, right? Still had a tremendous defensive game. He was 65% from the floor, 13 out of 20 shooting, which, by the way, to help give, I need any more reason to validate his finals MVP selection, led all players in shot attempts, right? So he was the most shot happy, so to speak, player on the floor. Even though he was only 20% from the 3-point line out of 1 of 5, and then only 25% from the free throw line, 1 of 4. So not really sexy numbers there, but he was the guy with the ball in his hands most of the game, whether he was passing or shooting. Anthony Davis chipped in with 19, 15, and 3, 2 blocks and a steal. He was 41% from the floor on 17 attempts, making only 7. He was 0 of 3 for deep, and his free throw shooting luck did run out. He was only 71%, 5 of 7 shooting. Austin, it's a tragedy whenever you drop from 100% the entire finals to a lowly 71%.
I was looking forward to seeing if he'd go all the way without missing a free throw. That would have been interesting. This game kind of, believe it or not, looked a little bit like Los Angeles had a whole team effort for a change. It wasn't just, LeBron and AD do the heavy lifting and the other guys kind of fill in. It was kind of everybody, brought their A game. You play off Rondo, he's a real thing, whether he wants to admit it or not. And he had 19 points last night, and he looked like a guy who was ready to be done with the bubble. He looked like he wanted to go home and finish this series out. I don't think they wanted to play again. They didn't want to have a Game 7. KCP and Danny Green, 2 of the more maligned players on this Lakers roster, 17 and 11 respectively. Green hit 3 threes, redeemed himself a little bit from the last game. And if
40% from the floor overall.
Right. And, what you said about his LeBron shooting numbers, he was 1 of 5 from the 3-point line. That means he was 12 of 15 from everywhere else on the field.
Correct.
That's insane. That's incredible. So he was locked in. Anthony Davis, I haven't hardly seen a better defensive performance in the finals than him the last 2 games. The numbers don't show it as much maybe as some other guys. But just there were times when Tyler Hero and other players were driving down the lane, and just his presence there, you see he just faked going up for a block, and they completely airballed. It completely changed guys' mindset in terms of attacking the rim. The Lakers ran the shooters off the 3-point line all night, and it was just an overall overwhelming team defensive performance. 36 points in the entire first half for Miami. That's crazy.
That's Lakers, like the Utah Jazz, right? Whenever they played against the Chicago Bulls.
Exactly. And, this Lakers team, you can look at this roster up and down and see the holes in it, and you can't say it's a stacked roster. They've got a lot of big names, but Dwight Howard and Rajon Rondo aren't the players that they were, in the past. Dwight Howard.
We talked about that last night. Nobody wanted Dwight Howard. Nobody really wanted him.
He's going to be, I'm pretty sure, pretty, wanted commodity this offseason. If the
Alex
Lakers don't keep
Caruso was a G League guy that they had to
Right.
turn to, for roster and cap space, right?
And he's been terrific all year. We made a comment about this last night but I think the majority of the games I remember looking at the box score, he was at the top or near the top and plus minus every game. Even games they got
starting
beat,
this game, he led them. Yeah.
Right. And so, there was a lot of guys that stepped up big. Anthony Davis didn't have his best offensive game, but 15 rebounds. One of the knocks on him is sometimes he doesn't rebound enough. I mean, what more do you want? What more can you say about, his performance throughout these playoffs, LeBron's performance throughout these playoffs? The one thing I did want to kind of go back a little bit on game 5 and mention was when you said about Danny Green missing that shot. For one, I don't feel LeBron should have put him in that situation to begin with. Everybody says he made the right basketball play. I feel like, he made the right basketball play. If this is a rec league and he's your teammate, you would want him to make that pass instead of going over 3 or 4 guys. But this is the NBA Finals, and he's the best player in the world. And personally, I'm riding with LeBron 1-on-4 versus a cold Danny Green 7 days a week. So to begin with, I think LeBron should have taken that shot. Maybe he misses it, maybe he doesn't. And, I can't knock him for making that pass. It was the right move.
Sure, on paper, it was the right play.
Right. Yeah. And then there's just, they call it hero ball because if you make that shot in that moment, you're a legend. You're a hero for making that shot. And you can't make it if you don't take it. And it's not like LeBron James isn't going to be a legend. I'm not trying to say that.
Correct.
You get what I mean. And Markieff Morris, I can't believe he doesn't get a little bit more of the blame at the end of the game there. He gets that offensive rebound and just throws it right out of bounds. Like, what are you doing?
It was
there wasn't even anybody around him. And
I think the intent was I think that he thought that Anthony Davis was going to kind of spin off of the defender.
Right.
And because AD does do a lot of that post spin technique right there. Right. So I thought that's what he was kind of seeing, but I may be being a little bit generous to Morris there.
Right. It's incredible to me that you don't even really hear about him. And then you hear in the media that Danny Green's getting death threats. Like it's ridiculous. The whole thing is ridiculous. So it was nice to see, Danny Green come out and hit some shots in game 6. It was awesome to see LeBron get, holding both those trophies again, getting his 4th finals MVP. I've got all kinds of stats and stuff ready for when we talk about LeBron. So we'll get to that.
Yeah, we'll let you back clean up with that here in a minute. But
sounds good.
Also want to just for a little bit, not going to take all the attention away from the Lakers and LeBron and things like that. But before I do that, buddy Robbie checking in and says, I'm happy that Keith got a chip. I always liked him as a wizard. I agree. LeBron needed to take the shot, but also a huge Green fan, and he could have made it for sure. I agree with that. And we've gone over the numbers ad nauseum. When he was 30% shooting for the entire finals and 29% shooting of the Western Conference Finals, it's kind of hard to justify giving him the ball to close out a game, right?
Right.
I also understand that Frank Vogel should get a little bit of that blame too, because I understand you are putting a lot of faith in your guys. You're probably trying to, stoke his fire, give him some confidence, things like that. At the same time, it's the NBA Finals. It's not sympathy ball, right? Like, it's not a time to be sympathetic for a guy like, oh, okay, he's been a X% 3-point shooter for his entire career. I'm going to put him in here in this case, right? I didn't think that was the right decision, and I kind of advocated for pulling him out a lot earlier in this game because it was like they were trying to get him, like they were intentionally trying to get him going.
Leave him open.
Yep.
Miami was leaving him open for a reason. Exactly.
But I don't want to beat up that too much. I want to give a lot of love on the show as much as I possibly can. But I do feel that LeBron James is the best player in basketball right now, and the best player should take the shot with more games down the line anyway, right? Like that's what I would have preferred, but I understand on paper that it was the right basketball play. All right, so moving on, the Miami Heat in this performance, Jimmy Butler, he had 12 points, 7 and 8, 1 block. He was 50% shooting from the floor, but he only had 10 attempts. He was 50% shooting from deep, but he only shot twice from there. And he was 1 of 3 from the free throw line. Bam Adebayo was actually the best player for the Heat that night. He was 66% shooting from the floor on 10 of 15 shooting. He was 5 of 9 from the line, 55%. Overall, he had 25, 10, and 5. Crowder and Robinson both were in double figures, 12 and 10 respectively. So knowing that and looking at the numbers, did it kind of validate what you saw on the floor, or was there a little bit of contrasting, stats to actual gameplay, what you saw?
From the most part, it does hang on. Stupid thing. Sorry.
No, it's all good.
Stat pages up and the video starts playing, of course. I feel like the numbers did kind of validate what you saw. Lakers led in rebounds again, straight steals, turnovers. They got out in the break more. They got more points in the paint. So, those were the kinds of things that I thought that they were going to win, and that was going to lead to what would win this series. And you said it, more than once. The turnover issue was a big problem for the Lakers in this series, and they finally had less turnovers than their teammates. So,
than their opponents.
Than their opponents. Jeez,
yeah. I know what you meant.
Yeah, both teams had 4 blocks. That's the one that kind of really sticks out to me because it felt like the Lakers were Anthony Davis, I thought, had 4 or 5 blocks by himself just in the first half, it seemed like. And
those were mental blocks, right? Like he just used the force, if you will.
Pretty much, yeah. And, one thing that I did notice in this game, too, is Tyler Hero was kind of nowhere to be found, at least on the offensive end for Miami. And he's been somebody that's really been, an offensive force for this team kind of throughout the playoffs. Like we talked about, he showed no fear throughout the entire playoffs. And Jimmy Butler, obviously taking 12 shots the whole game, he was just exhausted. I don't think he had anything left in the tank. I wrote something down about, I think Jimmy Butler, that picture of him slumped over at the end of game 5, like coaches should put that up in locker rooms. And like, that's what the image of what giving it your all looks like, he showed that I think he belongs as a superstar in the NBA, or at least in the discussion. And, you got to give him credit for what he did in game 5 to even force a game 6. But I mean, he played, I think, 45 minutes again last night. And that's just, he's not used to really being the kind of the playmaker and having the ball in his hands all the time. He's always been a good scorer and a good defender, but he hasn't really been the focal point of the offense that.
An initiator.
Initiator. Yes. And that's, it takes a lot out of you, and that's a lot different way to play than I think, just being relied on to shut down the guy from the other team or relied on to score. You have to kind of do everything. And, so he put his team on his back 2 different times, the 2 games they won. I mean, you can't really give credit to anybody but him for those wins. So
triple doubles in both of those victories.
And so what more can you say about it?
It's really hard to say anything else except nice things about him, right? And then our buddy Robbie, he's brought up a couple good points. One, he said, I wouldn't be surprised if Butler was just exhausted carrying the team like he did. I was impressed by the Heat. I think that we all were. I think that the Heat are kind of even though that the Lakers won, I think the Heat walk away a little bit of the darlings of the finals too, because as the 5th seed, upsetting the 1st seed in the Eastern Conference there, they made it past the Boston Celtics, who I thought were going to make the finals. I know that you felt, similarly than I
definitely did.
Yeah. So, we brought up that Jimmy Butler only played all but 90 seconds of the last game. And then in the closeout game last night, he played 45 minutes. So there was 3 minutes of rest there. So you're talking about in 2 games worth, only sitting out about 5 minutes in 2 games. That's insane. Right. Especially when you're playing to survive. It's not like you have a cushion, and every move that you make has to essentially be perfect against the best player in the world and another top 5 talent.
Right.
It's a lot physically and mentally, I could imagine. Right.
He didn't just put up a triple double in those games. He also guarded LeBron a lot and played tremendous defense for stretches and just did a lot of everything. It's not like he was out there for 45 minutes as a standstill 3-point shooter.
Yeah, absolutely. And then another point that Robbie brought up, he said sometimes bringing back a big part, I'm assuming he meant of the lineup, also throws off chemistry. Drago is one of the best players all playoffs, but just not enough shots for everyone when the Lakers were rebounding like that. I don't have the box score in front of me, but it didn't feel like Dragic put up a lot of shots.
He took 8 shots.
He took 8 shots. So you're talking, 2 per quarter. That's really not a lot. But I do think there's something to what Robbie is saying as far as, it throws off chemistry, right? Because you're talking about how Dragic didn't play in games 3 through 5, right? And then he comes back for 6, right off of a red hot win and throws off. And then you look at game 3, they lost Dragic and Bam Adebayo, and then they won that game. And then Bam comes back the following game, and then they lose. So I think there's a little bit of correlation, maybe not causation there. But maybe there is a little bit of something to that, Austin. How do you
I feel like it definitely I think it kind of threw off their rotations at least. We had game 2 where Myers Leonard was starting, and then game 6 he plays 0 minutes and doesn't even get off the bench. And like we said, game 3 Bam wasn't in there. They get a win. Game 4 he comes back, and that us against the world mentality and let's give the ball to Jimmy Butler and let him take us to the promised land kind of disappeared. And they lost. And then game 5 somehow he got that back. It was like he just needed a little bit of rest in between or whatever. I mean, I know he was probably exhausted, and it turned right back to that, give me the ball, watch out, and let me take you there. And with Dragic coming back, he honestly played better than I expected. I'm sure, I don't have any numbers to back this up or real memory of it, but I'm sure Dragic had to be a little bit of a defensive liability out there with that foot injury. There's no way he was a 100%. He was 0 for 4 from 3. I think that is a little bit of a byproduct of rust. He hadn't been out there for a while. He was 2 for 8 from the field. He did have 5 rebounds, 2 assists, and a steal. He was +2 in the plus minus. He scored 5 points. So it wasn't a terrible outing, but I mean, he was averaging about 20 points or more a game before that injury. And, it does change things. It could completely have changed the outcome of a couple of these games or made him taking it to a game 7. I think ultimately, though, you can't blame injuries for 1, and 2, the Lakers, regardless of who was healthy and who wasn't, had the 2 best players in this series, and 9 times out of 10, you're going to win with that. So
and let's remind everybody that the Lakers were without Avery Bradley and DeMarcus Cousins, so it's not like the Lakers granted they had adjusted for that the entire playoffs. As opposed to trying to learn on the fly in the finals, right? But they were still not technically 100% themselves. A couple of things that I had for Game 6, Austin. Did you want to add something real quick?
No, go ahead.
Okay. I already mentioned about how I've been clamoring for Caruso to get that start, and I was so happy to see that. You mentioned that he led the box score for the Lakers and plus minus. He did that with 4-point scoring. So what do you have to do to have a plus 20 box score while only scoring 4 points? The defense had to be there, right?
Had to play great defense, and he was probably in the game with LeBron and AD most of the time that he was in there. That helped. And
he topped them by 2 points, right? So pretty impressive. When I say top by 2 points, I'm talking about plus minus, not actual points going in the hoop.
I feel like it happened in game 1, and it kind of happened again in game 6, where when the starters kind of, at least LeBron, went out, the rest of the team kind of picked it up and kind of extended their lead in both of those games. And that's something that you don't normally see from the Lakers. It's usually like, how can we get by until we can get him back in? Not, all right, LeBron's out, here we go. And it was like that kind of more than once in this series. So that was something interesting that I took away from that. And one other stat that I have almost forgot to mention that I definitely wanted to get out there.
Yeah,
LeBron James and Anthony Davis. Let me actually read it so I make sure I get it right. Where is it? I can't find it. It was LeBron James and Anthony Davis were the first playoff teammates to average 25 points per game in the finals with over a 60% effective field goal percentage. First time teammates have ever done that in the finals. So
I pretty incredible.
Thought that was pretty awesome. It showed how efficient they were in the series and how dominant they were. And it surprised me when you told me that LeBron took more shots in the playoffs than anybody else. Didn't expect that, just because it seemed like every game he was just, like 13 of 18, 12 of 15, 14 of 20, just so efficient.
Well, I was speaking specifically for game 6. Now I have to go, but I meant just for the closeout game that he led everybody in.
Okay.
and shot attempts
Maybe
for that game.
that probably makes a little bit more sense then.
Right.
But still, he did have the ball in his hands a lot, and it was impressive how efficient him and AD both were in this game. I think one of the big things that people who were trying to say Anthony Davis deserved Finals MVP is that he is so efficient. And, it just showed LeBron actually was equally just as efficient in this series too. So that was pretty incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that if you looked at games 1 and 2, that's when I was kind of saying I would actually have AD as my Finals MVP because he was, scoring better and more efficiently. He only trailed LeBron in points in game 2 by 1 point, and then game 2 he was up by much more. And his defensive responsibilities are a lot more larger than LeBron James. But from game 3 on, like, you couldn't make the case for anybody else on the Lakers, obviously. And then the only way that you could award Jimmy Butler is if they won. And neither of those things actually happened, right?
No, they did not.
Yeah. So Buddy Robbie, again, he's been great, kind of chiming in through the show. Really appreciate the support.
Yeah,
he said this has been a great breakdown. I'm excited to talk about it myself tonight. And then he also said, I was never really a big LeBron James fan before this run, but I really was impressed and happy they did it for Kobe. I was a huge Laker fan back then. I've shared my thoughts on this a lot. I've never really been a big Kobe fan up until close to the end. And I'm kind of seeing the same thing with myself with LeBron James. This is the first time that I actually found myself rooting for him. And again, I'm not going to get into a big philosophical debate about, what makes a hater and what doesn't. I would say that I've been critical of him. I think that would be a fair assessment, but, I don't want to see him fail, and I'm glad that he is 4 of 6, and we'll talk about this a little bit more. I do want to kind of talk a little bit more about game 6, because I had a couple more points, and then we can get into the, a lot of the, what this actually means for everybody involved, right? Another point I wanted to bring up was that this was an incredible game. It was incredible that it finished as narrowly as it did when you consider at one point the Lakers were up by 36. They went into the half with the second largest lead in NBA Finals history. And the first lead, the largest lead, was when the Lakers were on the opposite end of this in the 80s against the Boston Celtics, right? So I thought that was interesting. Thirdly, we don't need to defend the Heat here. And I've been saying this all along, that I know how good they are, right? They made it to the finals, like no further explanation needed, right? But I do think that Jimmy Butler played, so much in this game that he was exhausted. They were dealing with a lot of key injuries, as much as I did just mention Avery Bradley and DeMarcus Cousins. Those aren't the biggest contributors to the Lakers as opposed to Dragic and Bam. Those are two key pieces to their success. And then the last point I want to make is that playoff Rondo was excellent. He was phenomenal. But outside of him, I mentioned in game 5 that the Lakers only had 3 players 40% or better in scoring. Well, in this game, if you count Dwight Howard's 1-for-1 shooting that he did to, kind of close out the game, they had 6 players that were above 40%, right? So they doubled that. And then you see that lead to victory. Yeah.
It was an impressive performance in the first half for sure. I think the only reason that final stat line wasn't embarrassing between these two teams is that fourth quarter when, they scored 35 points against Quinn Cook and Jared Dudley. And I've never got the feeling, at least as long as I've known you, that you've been a LeBron hater. So don't worry too much about that.
I appreciate it.
I try my best not to, sing his praises too much. I was kind of, for the first 10 or 12 years of his career, I would never say I was a LeBron hater, but I wasn't a fan by any stretch of the imagination. And it definitely changed for me, I think, in 2016 when he came back from 3-1 and beat the Warriors, incredible performance right then. It was kind of, I remember when he had that big block and won that game, and they won that game. It just it was like a gut feeling, like I'm never going to see anything like this again. I need to appreciate this while we're watching it. And, it kind of just changed my whole perspective on things. It's like from that point on, I was kind of like, well, I can appreciate the fact that Michael Jordan was probably the best I've ever seen up to now, but this guy's just, he's unreal too. He's just as good, if not better in some ways. And, why can't I appreciate both of them? And so that was just kind of that defining moment for me there. The things about that you said about Game 6, the first half, it was just incredible. I mean, at one point they were up 36 points. You don't see that in the NBA Finals
ever.
I mean, the last time I think it happened was when Jordan did it to the Utah Jazz.
Yeah,
and it's just an uncommon thing to see how much time they were filling on the broadcast with, stuff about, this is going to be the Lakers' 17th title and their 4th championship. I mean, it's very rare that you see a closeout game that decidedly over with at that point. So that was interesting as well.
Yeah, and Robbie has been a great guest here on the show all day. He said that he used to be a full-on hater, obviously being a Wizards fan, and he reports on a lot of, DC-related sports topics. So please go check out his stuff on the Hill Sports. But
sure,
yeah, and he said that MJ was his favorite too, and that started to change with the Warriors, like how you were mentioning too. Mm-hmm. Now, it's to the point now to where if someone tells me that they have LeBron James as their GOAT, and my buddy Chris LeBron of the Off the Ball Network was with us last night in our post-game analysis, and he said the same thing that I'm going to just start echoing too. If he's your GOAT, I have no complaint. Like, I'm not going to argue with you because it's a lot closer. 4-6 is a lot better than 3-6, right? 4 Finals MVPs, first player to ever do that on 3 different teams. Really 4 if you evaluate how different those Cleveland Cavalier teams were. Like if you wanted to dig a little deeper, it was essentially 4 different teams that he has competed on. It's just phenomenal the amount of accolades that he has. 2nd in playoff points, 4th in playoff rebounds, 2nd in playoff assists, 2nd in playoff steals, 2nd all time in playoff triple doubles.
Right.
He's getting up there in the most finals games ever played.
He actually last night he broke the record for most finals games. He was tied with Derek Fisher until last night. So
there you go.
Pretty fitting.
Yes, absolutely. Has played the most finals games, and you would like to think that he's far from over in that area too. So he's going to start, leaving margins in a lot of these all-time, records that he has. But I still have MJ as my GOAT, and kind of what Stephen A. Smith was saying on First Take this morning. I don't know how you or some of our audience feel about Stephen A. Smith. I don't agree with everything he says, but this morning he was saying, "Oh no, what an insult! I have him as the 2nd best player of all time."
So much hate, right?
So much hate. I hate him so much that I have him over 99.8%.
Magic Johnson and Will Chamberlain and Kareem.
Right. And what does it for me are the defensive achievements that MJ had. There is something to be said. That's something to be said about three-peating twice. That just the degree of difficulty to not only do that, but play in a time where you didn't have a lot of free agency movement. You didn't see, and I'm not criticizing player empowerment, but I'm saying that staying in one location, and then when there wasn't a lot of movement to his team, really, like, sure, Dennis Rodman, Tony Kukoc, Steve Kerr, but you didn't have like your Miami Heats forming up due to free agency. You didn't have your, what I mean? Like, and again, I'm not trying to criticize. I'm just telling you my explanation for why I still have MJ as the GOAT. But if you were to tell me, and you did, that LeBron James is your GOAT, I can't argue that. And I have said this, on social media a lot. I'll go ahead and say it again publicly here, put it in the ether. If LeBron James repeats, and it's funny, I mentioned this last night, and Magic Johnson on First Take was basically saying the same thing that I've been saying. If he repeats next season, he's up there with MJ. I'll go as far as to say he will take over as the GOAT in my eyes. If he repeats next year, he will, in fact, be my GOAT. What do you have to say about that, Austin?
That's a fair assessment. I agree with you 100%. You can't really fault anyone for picking one way or the other, but I do want to put it out there that, much love to Kobe, Kareem, anybody else. It's LeBron or Jordan. Like, I don't want to hear any arguments really for anybody else at this point. It's really those two to me, and then everybody else. I just think, a couple. You mentioned a lot of the stats that I wanted to bring up about LeBron, and it just, it goes to show how many of them there are that I even have more. He's played in 55 NBA Finals games, so roughly 3/4 of an entire NBA season he's played in the finals.
Or one of the seasons that we had this year, basically. You know what
basically
I mean?
the number of games that they played this year. He's played in the finals, 55 games in the finals. To compare, Jordan, he didn't ever lose, so he didn't go to as many, but he played in 35 finals games, which is a lot. LeBron's been basically in 3 full 7-game series more than Jordan played in the finals. So that just adds to the fact that it's year 17, and if he's slowed down at all, it's almost not noticeable.
Yeah.
Maybe he doesn't get up quite as high on those dunks anymore, but it's not like he needed to. It's not like he's struggling to get up. It's not like he can't get up and down the court.
Yeah, he didn't need to get as high as he had in the first place, really.
Exactly.
Right. So.
It was great for those photos like that, alley-oop with him and Dwayne Wade. It was great for, the magazine covers and stuff.
Of course.
But this is the first time we're getting to see what it looks like when a player does gain all this knowledge and experience and round out their game to this level without losing any of that athletic ability.
Yeah, when the mental and physical mesh, it's
never really happened. Not like this. No. And in the finals alone, he averages 42 minutes a game, 28.4 points, 10.2 rebounds, 7.8 assists, 1.7 steals, and 0.8 blocks. He shoots 48% from the field and about 35% from threes, a career 73% free throw shooter. He's played over 2,000 minutes.
Way to gloss over what he averaged in this finals for the free throw line there.
No, can't do everything.
Can't
really perfect all across the board.
You can't. And it's free throws. Like he's
scored about 1,500 points, 561 rebounds, 430 total assists. He's had almost 100 steals and almost 50 blocks in his career. Believe it or not, in the finals, I mean, I guess it makes sense since he has lost more finals than he's won. His plus minus overall is actually a minus 86. That's kind of surprising to me. But just playoffs overall, my big determining factor between Jordan and LeBron is kind of the overall body of work. And it's already pretty close, if not in LeBron's favor. And he's nowhere near being done, I don't think.
He said it himself last night.
TV, right? I've got a lot of years left. And I liked seeing him say, I want my damn respect. Excuse my language, but I just was quoting what he said.
Yeah.
And I just think, it's time for people to start, understanding, like you said, we need to appreciate him while he's here, because who do you see doing this that's coming up or that's, young in the NBA right now? No one. I can't even begin to fathom that how long it's going to be before something like this happens again. When I was a little kid and my dad told me about those Celtics teams that went to all those finals and how, Bill Russell made it to the finals 11 times. And I was like, he made it that many times. There's no way that's ever going to happen again. And here we are, and now it's real. It's a reality. And I mean, just in the playoffs overall, he's played in 260 games. That's, 3.2 entire seasons. Yeah. So if you count up all those minutes, plus all the minutes he's played in the regular season, plus he's been in the Olympics, the amount of basketball that this guy has played, the amount of miles that are on his body, and to still be doing what he does at this level, I mean, he's 35 years old. He's been the best player at his position for at least the last 10 to 15 years. And now you're telling me in year 17, he's not only going to switch to point guard, but be arguably the best point guard in the league and lead the league in assists. That's insane. That's mind blowing to think that you can go from being, like we said last show, the size of Karl Malone, and you're now the best point guard in the league at age 35.
Yeah, you put Magic Johnson's mentality in Karl Malone's. Now again, Magic Johnson was a pretty tall cat, right? Like he actually filled in at center at one point when Kareem was hurt in one of the finals. He actually played center, so he had positional size, but he was not built like a freight train, guys. Like the way that players worked out in the 80s compared to what they do now, like the science and healing and the amount of money that LeBron James puts into his body, not just food wise. Like I can compete with a lot of people with the amount of food I put in my body, right? But the amount of stuff that he does to keep his, the longevity. We mentioned, 35 years old, 17th NBA season. All the extra seasons that he's put on this body just by being successful. Like it's It's phenomenal. And I am at the point, so again, I'm at the point to where if you tell me that he's your GOAT, I'm not going to sit here and argue with you, because to me, like, it's 1A is Michael and 1B is LeBron. They're still, I mean, that's where I have them. And if, like I said, if he repeats, I'm going to have that shift a little bit. But again, I'm not taking away from LeBron James for hate. I want to talk about some other players that were involved in here. And just real quick, we can just do a quick little snapshot how we feel. I want to talk about some players and how a ring defines their legacy, because you mentioned Definitely. That LeBron wasn't the only cat in the game that had some skin, with the victory tonight. I want to start with the Heat though and work my way up to LeBron James. So I want to start with the I don't even want to call them losers, right? But the defeated
runners
team.
Up.
Yeah, the runner up, and work our way up to LeBron James. So what does a ring do in your eyes for Jimmy Butler?
I think if he had won a ring in this finals specifically, it would have cemented his legacy as one of the superstars ever in the NBA. I think superstar is a very hard to reach title. I think he could still easily get there. I'm not quite as strict as to say you have to have a title to be a superstar, but it's pretty close.
I mean, look, Charles Barkley, Karl Malone, John Stockton.
Exactly.
I mean, the list goes on.
Can you make it to the finals with this guy as your best team, or as your best player? Can you rely on him to win a game for you in that situation? And Jimmy Butler did it twice against a much superior talented team with a banged up roster. And if he had taken them and won 4 games with them, you would have to put that in the level of like the 2011 Mavericks with Dirk, and maybe even the Toronto Raptors with Kawhi. I don't know. I feel like
the Detroit Pistons.
I feel like as good as Toronto was this year, it kind of dispelled that idea that it was all about Kawhi Leonard. But he did have a great finals. But it would be up there with one of the single, 06 when Dwayne Wade basically, turned that series around by himself and won the finals. It would be a performance like that. So it would be kind of a legacy defining thing for him, I think, especially this year.
But even with a loss, how do you feel that we walk away this season and coming into next year looking at Jimmy Butler?
Well, I think I've said it before, but he's been telling everybody since he was in Minnesota, if you do things my way and you listen to me, I'll take you where you want to go. If you're willing to work the way I'm willing to work. And he's been saying it for a long time, and people kind of didn't believe him. And, I think your buddy Chris said last night, and I kind of did too, I kind of picked them to be maybe the 8th seed in the East. I didn't think they'd be anywhere near as good as they were. And he proved me wrong. And I think you saw a lot of people's minds changed, including mine, on whether or not Jimmy Butler is at that level. And I think he 100% is.
Sure. And I only have, considering the rest of the Heat's roster, the guys are so young. There's really not a lot of guys on here. You could throw in Andre Iguodala, but I don't think with the role that he has on this team, that one more ring really sways his view one way or the other. But I do want to talk about Erik Spoelstra. We did see some pretty poor taste in comments saying that, he was exposed in this. But I think a lot of us who were unbiased and level-headed and analyze the game, with a level of, intellect and dignity, right? We all have nothing but high praises for Erik Spoelstra. Right. How do you walk away from this finals going into next year on your views on Erik Spoelstra?
They haven't changed, but that's because I've thought Erik Spoelstra was about a top 3 coach for quite a while now. I don't think you get from the video room to the head coach of the Miami Heat with a guy like Pat Riley, and you don't stay there as long as he has. You don't make it outlast LeBron James saying, "Hey, I don't want this guy to be my coach." That doesn't happen to really anybody else anywhere else that he's been. That hasn't happened. Yep. Luke Walton. I mean, Luke Walton might be the worst head coach in the NBA, but that's neither here nor there. But Luke Walton,
David Blatt
didn't have a chance to survive. David Blatt didn't have a chance to survive. Tyronn Lue won a title with LeBron, and nobody gives him credit for it. You know, but in Miami, you don't really hear that about Erik Spoelstra. It's not like, oh, LeBron. No one really talked about LeBron being the coach of that team. That kind of started when he went back to Cleveland, I feel like. And Erik Spoelstra did get exposed. He got exposed as a great coach. I think he put on
a
coaching clinic if you will, at least in the conference finals against Boston. I'm really high on Brad Stevens as well.
Me too.
And he had Brad Stevens' team completely confused on offense. That zone just shut them down. It exposed a hole that obviously I don't think a lot of NBA teams really work on, and it's how to beat a zone. And unfortunately, the Lakers are just so big and fast and athletic. It's just, eventually they're gonna beat that zone. They're just too talented, and they were overmatched. To me, if you look up and down the roster, Portland has a first-team All-NBA star in Damian Lillard, and they never scared me in terms of beating the Lakers. In the second round against Houston, they have 2 All-NBA level players, arguably
former MVPs.
Right, 2 former MVPs, 2 of arguably the 10 best players in the NBA. And this small ball lineup that's supposed to give everybody fits, especially the Lakers, because they have a big roster. I was never really worried. They completely overwhelmed them. In the Western Conference Finals, they go up against Denver, who just beat a lot of people's pick to win the title, the Clippers. And right, come back from 2-3-1 deficits, and just won't go away. Jamal Murray is having the playoffs to remember. Scoring 50 points every other game, it seemed like, and it never worried me that they were going to beat the Lakers for a second. After Game 5, when LeBron had a 40-point game and they still won, I was a little bit worried about the Miami Heat. And that's saying something, considering they had no Goran Dragic up till that point. Bam wasn't 100%. And this is a team that everybody thought was a year or 2 away from possibly getting the guys they needed to be at this level. So I just think it was a masterclass in coaching in terms of the whole playoffs as a whole for Eric Spoelstra, and just the way he was able to, even, I feel like, steal a couple games in that finals.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did, before we had, you graced us with your presence here on the show, Austin, back when I was just flying solo. I did a early season, kind of who my top 3 and bottom 3 coaches were. And I had Eric Spoelstra, even then, in my top 3. I still, obviously, after this performance, think the world of Eric Spoelstra. When you look at, yes, the first season without LeBron, they had to retool their lineup, obviously, because the philosophy with LeBron used to be, before this season, was that you surround them with a bunch of spot up shooters. A lot of them are older. You get rid of all your assets in order to get the team that he wants and keep him happy, so he stays, right? So when LeBron leaves, it's really hard to win with a bunch of past your prime spot up shooters and no one who can create offense for themselves or others, right? So, it took a little bit for Miami to get back into the swing of things, but, with an old Dwayne Wade coming back from Chicago, still and helping them make the NBA playoffs and things like that, it's just, and you saw Josh Richardson kind of get developed enough to bring in a guy like Jimmy Butler, to where Philadelphia can say, yeah, we'll part ways with Jimmy Butler because we have Josh Richardson coming back. Like, not only did Miami, evaluate a guy that they really wanted in free agency and did everything they could to get him, but they developed their guys well enough to where other teams can say, if Miami can do that, so can we. I'm not going to come into a free agency ever again and say Miami only signed X player and doubt them, because if Miami wants you, you got a lot going for you.
Miami signs the right players for their system better than any other team, any other franchise in the NBA. And that's part of the reason Jimmy Butler didn't work out in Philadelphia and didn't work out in Minnesota. I think he worked out in Philadelphia, but he wasn't happy. That's why he left.
They didn't want to give him what he wanted either.
Right. But I think reports have kind of come out too that he, just felt like winning wasn't as important to those guys as it was to him. And it just, that doesn't really work, because if you're not all in on something like that, then someone that's as
psychopath.
Yes. Someone that's as crazy about it as Jimmy Butler is going to be really overbearing if you're not kind of in that cut from that same mold. And I think it shows with who they draft. It shows with who they trade for. Everybody was up, excited they got Andre Iguodala, but Jay Crowder turned out to be the best part of that trade. And he
constantly in double figures.
He was viewed as a throw-in kind of, and Miami probably said, if we can get this guy, we'll go to the finals. Everybody said that they should have tried to add in Danilo Gallinari, and it probably would have helped, and it would have been great. But they got a lot already in that trade.
Yeah.
More than I think people realized.
Who would you not play over Danilo Gallinari? Like maybe Kelly Olynyk, but you lose a lot of the things that Kelly brings in, right? Or
I would almost say at some point it would maybe be Andre Iguodala. I know he's a great defender, but you can't really defend him playing over any of those other guys when he's not really an offensive threat.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. So now the runner-up, those were the only two players that I really felt like or player and coach that I really felt like were necessary when we're talking about legacy, because like I said, Iguodala has done so much and he really wasn't that big of a role there. And he was never really an all NBA level guy. He's basically just like, and I say basically, right?
I think Goran Dragic could have probably benefited a lot in terms of his overall, story if he had won a ring this year. And
I just don't feel like he's done enough, resume wise. Like he's one of those guys that I think that he benefits like maybe off of a contract for another team. Yeah. You know what I mean? But I don't think that I'm talking like, Hall of Fame
in terms of all time. Okay. Yeah.
Like all time greats and things like that.
Yeah. He's definitely a step below that.
Yeah. And I feel like, not that there's anything wrong with this role, right? But Andre Iguodala is like in that Bruce Bowen, Ron Artest, Tayshaun Prince, what I mean? Like he's in that kind of a mold, which you need to win. Right. But that's his ceiling to me when you talks about just like overall greatness. But I want to transition now to the Los Angeles Lakers because they have a few cats in here other than, the biggest one on the court right now. I want to start with Dwight Howard because he didn't play much in Game 6, right? We talk about greatness. I think that there's a lot of guys who watch the NBA now who didn't get to see prime Dwight Howard, who did in his own right when he was in Orlando as a member of the Magic, did carry a team to the NBA Finals against the Los Angeles Lakers once upon a time. And granted, there were good players on that squad, not anybody who was like all NBA level worthy or anything like that. And Stan Van Gundy was a coach and kind of ahead of his time with the 4 out, 1 in. Everybody shoots from 3. What do you think a ring does for Dwight Howard? Does it change whether or not he's Hall of Fame or does it just does it already include him in the Hall of Fame and kind of boost his standing among some of the all-time greats at his position?
I think he was, believe it or not, in a lot of people's minds, I think he was very borderline to make the Hall of Fame without a ring. But I think it definitely, I personally feel he should have already been a Hall of Famer or will be a Hall of Famer based on his resume before this. But this definitely, just kind of cements his place in the Hall of Fame. Let's be honest, the Basketball Hall of Fame is by far the easiest one to get into in all the major sports. It really is. And it's not the NBA Hall of Fame, it's the Basketball Hall of Fame.
Correct.
And so, there's a lot of guys that get in for, their whole body of work from the time they were in high school on up, and coaches and whatever else. So it's a little bit different than
Olympic play, things like that too. Yeah.
And it's a little bit different than, like the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame where they take 2 or 3 guys every year and sometimes they don't take any. So I think he would have been in regardless. That being said, him getting a ring on top of what you said about his time in Orlando. And I mean, people forget that when he went to the Lakers the first time, it was a disaster. He had so many expectations and it completely torpedoed his career for a while. He had those back injuries and people didn't really understand that how much of his athleticism it robbed. I mean, he was every bit of an athletic freak as LeBron James is. And I mean, just a monster. And back injuries are awful. You can't do anything. There's times where, guys talk about you can't even get up off the couch with a back spasm. And, you sometimes hear people, he had a cramp in his back or a back spasm, get up and play. Like you can't move. It's
right.
And, not only that, you're out there banging in the post with the biggest, strongest guys in the NBA.
And what do you use to box out with? What part of your body do you use?
Your lower back and and it's a devastating injury for a big man like that. And then he went to Houston where he wasn't a good fit with James Harden. And it kind of became James Harden and him, one or the other kind of camp thing, and they were always going to keep James Harden.
Of course.
And honestly, he needed to be humbled, and he was. I mean, he spent time in Charlotte, didn't he?
Yeah, and Washington.
And Washington. He kind of, bounced around the league. Nobody seemed to want him for very long. And then all of a sudden he pops back up on the Lakers last minute because
nobody wanted to sign him.
Right. And DeMarcus Cousins had that injury, and he was just kind of like the filler in big guy. And all of a sudden now he's a great teammate. He's a glue guy. And he's
shooting threes.
Right. And doing a little bit of everything. He's the cheerleader on the sidelines. He went from being one of the worst teammates, I think, in the NBA to one of the best.
Yeah.
Almost overnight. And it probably not overnight. It just he wasn't really in the spotlight for us to really hear about it.
Sure.
Washington and Charlotte.
Yeah.
Towards the bottom of the league.
Kind of the bottom there.
So it was, him getting a ring does a lot for the overall story of his career. I think it definitely cements his place in the Hall of Fame. But for me personally, I think he should have been there anyway.
Yeah, and I think that he had done enough prior to this ring as well. I just think that it goes from now him being like eventually into the Hall of Fame to probably being a first ballot, because you think the 2000s, like when he came in 04, from like 04 to like 2010, 11, like he was like the center. Like you had to vote positionally, and he always took home the all first team center. Like you mentioned his athleticism, multiple defensive player of the years, multiple all-stars, rebounding champ, season after season.
Mm-hmm.
Even in Washington and Charlotte, he was still a tremendous rebounder. And coming into LA, just out of nowhere, he decides that, hey, I'm going to be a 3-point shooter now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And kind of like what we saw with Carmelo Anthony in the same season, I think it did take a little bit of humbling, because I could imagine that going from thinking that you're the best player at your position, and rightfully so at one point, to now all of a sudden, like, a team may not want you because of your personality. Like, that's got to be tough, because
fairly quickly too.
Yeah, because when you're wanted for your personality and your dominance and things like that, and then all of a sudden you feel like you're acting and behaving the same way, but now all of a sudden nobody wants you for that same thing. Like, that's got to be tough to deal with, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you could argue that Kobe Bryant, the one knock against him is that talking about psychopaths as far as wanting to win so much. Did he break Dwight Howard? You know what I mean? Like,
kind of felt like he did.
Because when you hear Pau Gasol talk about how hard it was to play with Kobe Bryant, and then Shaquille O'Neal, probably one of the best, is one of the best centers of all time. He and Kobe can't work it out because Kobe, thought that he was the best player in the world. It's,
Kobe Bryant went out in the media and said Shaq was fat and he wished he would have worked out.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't and Shaq's one of the few guys that can really probably take that and really just let it slide right off his back.
Mm-hmm.
There's videos of Kobe just destroying Andrew Bynum in practices and, guarding him in the post and kind of embarrassing him, outworking him, bodying up with him and making him look, kind of weak considering he's so much bigger than him.
Correct.
And it's just a lot of these guys, you don't think about the fact that these guys come into a profession where they're on the world stage in front of everyone at such a young age. They don't develop maturity the same way most people do.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not they have to grow up quicker or they get coddled, I don't know really which it is. It's kind of it can be different.
And Dwight Howard did come out of high school too,
right? So beyond that, what 25 or 6-year-old guy likes being embarrassed in front of people ever anywhere? That age, I was a pretty proud guy. I wasn't the finished product you see before you, but I wasn't able to probably handle some criticism like that in front of my peers, let alone, hear about it in the news on national television. And like I said,
storyline every time you take the floor.
Exactly. So, the mental aspect of that, of what Kobe does to some guys or what Jordan probably did to some guys.
It works. Some guys, yes.
It definitely produces results, but it also can alienate a lot of people. And I think that's one of the ways where it's different now versus even when Kobe played, is there's not a whole lot of guys that are like that in the NBA now. It's more of a, build up your teammates, kind of positive reinforcement kind of league. Seems like, I don't think we're going to hear about teammates punching each other in the face in practice, not at that level of,
Bobby Portis and
right. Maybe two, role players, but I mean, I don't think you're going to be hearing much about LeBron James or Kevin Durant or Giannis punching a teammate in the face.
I wouldn't want to get hit in the face by either of those cats. But yeah, so I agree with you on Dwight Howard. I want to get into a couple other guys.
Right.
We already talked about playoff Rondo.
Mm-hmm.
Only the second player in NBA history. I already forgot the gentleman who did it beforehand, but I think to win with the Lakers and the Celtics, the first gentleman won it when he was with when it was the Minneapolis
Lakers.
Right. So quite a long time since we've seen, because of the rivalry, right? Like to start in his career in Boston, to not even be considered a part of a big three, because of his age,
right.
But led the league in assists almost year after year after year. He was up there in steals year after year after year. Wasn't really ever a 3-point shooter until like 2 or 3 seasons ago.
Mm-hmm.
And in the regular season, it's been awful. In the playoffs, it's been pretty darn good. And one of the best basketball minds that I think that we have in our game today that doesn't get appreciated because of his attitude, right? This is another Dwight Howard type thing. Comes to LA, a situation where he's kind of ran out of places that want him. And, Magic Johnson said on Get Up this morning or on First Take this morning that, everyone thought he was crazy for bringing in another ball handler, saying that you need someone to kind of help take pressure off of LeBron James so where he doesn't have to do that as much.
Mm-hmm.
He was knocked because, he's a locker room problem, even though that he did play on teams with DeMarcus Cousins and teams with Anthony Davis. He was in a very heated rivalry against LeBron James, and we all know that LeBron can kind of hold a grudge to some level of degree, right?
Mm-hmm.
But winning a ring here in Los Angeles, where does that put Rajon Rondo in your eyes as far as the legacy?
I love Rajon Rondo as a player, and I agree with everything that you said about a lot of this being, in terms of his attitude, why he bounced around the way he did. Going back to his days in Boston, I think it's kind of another thing that people kind of forget about, like with Dwight Howard. It's just how good he was at times. Rajon Rondo is to me, other than Chris Paul, the epitome of what a floor general is supposed to be in the NBA. Chris Paul's probably the only one that I can think of current player wise in the last, in this era that is above him in that aspect, because look how good he was when he had the big three in Boston with him. Look at the numbers he put up. I mean, he had so many 20 assist games, crazy 20 triple doubles and stuff, just outrageous numbers at that time, especially for a point guard. I think guards rebound a lot more in the NBA today than they used to, partially because there's less big guys on the floor, partially because there's more threes, so there's a lot long rebounds
on the floor a lot more.
Right, big guys are out, spreading the floor, shooting threes. So rebounding is a lot different than it used to be. I think Russell Westbrook was kind of the ushered in the new era of these, double-digit rebounding guards.
Yeah, because when you have your point guard rebound the ball, right, it does a lot for you in transition, right? Because you have your best passer with more options available out in front of them. So whenever you give the ball to, a guy like a Rajon Rondo, you get him in the open floor, the defense isn't set, and you have more options for him to be able to find a bucket, basically, right?
Right. So whether or not he's a Hall of Famer, it's tough. His career average in the regular season is only 10.3 points per game, but he averages 8 assists, which is almost a double-double, about 5 rebounds, and almost 2 steals a game. So he does a little bit of everything really, really well. But looking at his playoff numbers, his career playoff average is only up 3 points, but he had years in the playoffs where he averaged 15, 16, 17 points a game, 14, 16.9. Every year almost was higher than his regular season average for his career. And he had 2 years where he averaged 12 assists a game in the playoffs. He had 2 years where he averaged 9 rebounds a game in the playoffs. He shows up when the lights are the brightest. And I think that's kind of what everybody really wants from anyone, that they like, that they follow, that's on their team, that they're a fan of, whatever. Nobody wants to defend a guy that's a regular season monster and then just wilts in the playoffs. I mean, you hear a lot of bad stuff about James Harden. People dog him a lot, and look at the numbers he puts up.
Yeah, and you're going to start hearing the same. You're already starting to hear the same things come out now about Giannis Antetokounmpo.
Right. And Giannis, I think more than anybody kind of understands that, when he says, don't call me 2-time MVP until I'm a champion, it's obvious to him. He understands that these regular season accolades don't really matter if you can't even make the finals.
Yeah. Cause he's growing up in an era where we define legacies now solely by team accomplishment. Your individual standing is solely based off of a ring. Whereas some of us, where I feel like you and I kind of agree, Austin, is that like the ring doesn't make you a GOAT. It doesn't make you a Hall of Famer. What it helps is whenever you're evaluating players of similar skills, similar level of accomplishment, you have to have some way to delineate between the two, like a MJ and a LeBron. And that's where I think the ring debate is helpful to some degree.
It's like that in every sport. Growing up, it was always Peyton Manning or Tom Brady. Personally, watching a game on the field, in terms of physical talent, throwing the ball, for me, it's Peyton Manning all day. Yeah. Tom Brady is going to be the GOAT no matter what you say, because he's got 6 rings, and he was a hell of a quarterback too, obviously. But
of course,
in terms of physical talents, there's hardly any comparisons to Giannis. In terms of scoring ability, there's hardly any comparisons to James Harden. But when there are, and when you're ranking the greatest of all time, there's a very fine line, and you have to consider every little thing, because player A, B, and C can look almost identical. But if player A has 3 titles and player B never made the finals, it's not even close.
Nope, you're not going to remember player C.
Right. And Rajon Rondo is kind of, the epitome of that. He turns it on every playoffs. He's got 2 rings now with the 2 premier franchises in the league. I think in overall terms of everything he's done for the game of basketball, his total story, you can even add in the narrative of him being a Celtic and a Laker, of him and LeBron. Like you said, it was not, to me, it was not even just a rivalry. I felt like Rajon Rondo hated LeBron James.
It was a genuine disdain.
Exactly. And another thing too, he wasn't just not a 3-point shooter. He was a bad shooter at the beginning of his career altogether. And he shot fairly well this year, especially from 3 in the playoffs. He shot 40%. The last two times he's been in the playoffs.
3 or 4, yeah.
The last 2 times he's been in the playoffs, he shot over 40% from 3. Looking back at the year he won a ring in Boston in 07-08, he was a 25% 3-point shooter. He only shot 42% on 2s, and he was about 50% this year. So, he developed that part of his game, which was a big hole for a long time. I remember when he was with the big 3, the defensive strategy was to not even really guard him outside of 15 feet and double on Kevin Garnett or somebody else.
Yeah.
And he's filled those holes in his game. He doesn't really have any holes. To me, he's the ultimate competitor. He's the ultimate teammate. He's one of the top guys I've ever remembered watching, in terms of you'd hate him against you, but you'd love him if he was on your team.
Yeah.
And, to me, I do think that he will end up in the Hall of Fame. Although I've kind of said that about every guy we've talked about so far. So,
well, and there's a reason why I'm bringing these guys up, because I think that this does help their Hall of Fame chances. But as far as legacy compared to other guys, I think that that's where you could kind of get a little bit into a little bit better of a discussion. But we're going to get into basically our first young guy that we're going to talk about, and that's Anthony Davis right now. He's already in conversations about being the best power forward of all time already. And considering where he came from in New Orleans, considering the lack of playoff experience that he had, for him to come in year 1, which I talked about this last night, I give Kawhi Leonard a lot of praises, because he went to Toronto in year 1 with Danny Green and brought in Marc Gasol on a midseason trade, and they worked it out with a brand new head coach in year 1 and won a title. The same thing is happening with this LA Laker team right now. Anthony Davis gets brought in for a boatload of assets, right? And was playing with LeBron and Rondo and Howard and all these other guys, right?
Right.
And they win in year 1. It's an incredible feat. Like, it hardly ever happens where you see in year 1 moves of this magnitude, it hardly ever works out in year one. Usually it takes a year to get accustomed to one another and maybe add one more key piece. And then in year two is where you see it come to fruition, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think Anthony Davis obviously will end up being a Hall of Famer. This is not, I'm not bringing him up now to ask whether or not he'll be a Hall of Famer. I think that it's abundantly clear that he will be, based off of where he is now and based off of his stats and where he projects out to be, things like that. Where do you have him already in terms of all-time power forwards based on him being obviously a very key piece? He was in discussion for Finals MVP in his one time being in the finals. Where do you place him so far in your all-time power forward list?
That's a good question. Well, I think the ring does a lot in terms of the narrative as far as all-time greats, but I'm with you in that, there's plenty of guys in the Hall of Fame that never won a ring. So that the fact that he's got a ring already and he's got the statistical, numbers that he has, it makes that an easy case. That's a done deal. In terms of greatest power forwards of all time, he's definitely not above Tim Duncan. He's definitely not above Dirk. He's definitely not above Kevin Garnett.
Karl Malone, Charles Barkley, or a couple of the other names that you.
Yep. I'm trying to think. I don't know. I think, honestly, at this point, barring some major injury and saying that, if he goes on to have the rest of the career that he it looks like he's going to have, then I would put him right now, if he never won another title, never won a scoring title. I think he will win a Defensive Player of the Year award, but he might have to win one or two of those to move up much, or several more rings. But I would say probably fourth or fifth. He's definitely, for me, above Karl Malone. I think Karl Malone, a lot of the talk about him is, that he's second all time in scoring, but he played so long. He stat padded a lot towards the end of his career.
Sure.
And, he never won a ring. Granted, he did have to go up against Michael Jordan, but at the end of the day, I do see the LeBron and Anthony Davis staying together and probably competing for a title for 2 or 3 more years at least. So ultimately, I think right now he's pretty solid in the top 5. Could he be the best power forward ever? Not unless he gets pretty close in terms of rings to Tim Duncan. I think Tim Duncan is the best power forward of all time. I think the easiest one for him to pass is Kevin Garnett. Dirk too. I think he could. Dirk's up there in scoring too, but Anthony Davis kind of projects to be in that level of a scorer as well, I feel like. And, if he had stayed in New Orleans and the entire narrative of his career was, he was a monster. Yeah, he put up incredible numbers, but he never really led his team to much winning, then this would be a lot different. But I think having a ring already at this point in his career, it takes an immense amount of pressure off of him in terms of where his all-time legacy ends up. So I could see him being as high as number 2, realistically, in my mind. He may, he's got a lot of time left, depending on how everything goes. He could end up challenging for the number 1 spot, but that's going to take a lot of work. I think realistically, he could already be pretty close to number 2.
Yeah, and I don't think that you're way off because he's 27 years old and got his first ring. He's in Los Angeles, which is a fairly competitive market as far as being a free agent destination. LeBron James is there endorsing the Lakers, so he's gonna, some people are gonna want to come in and get their ring too on this team on the cheap, and who knows what's in the future for him. If he with this ring, to me, he's already up there with Dirk and already up there with Kevin Garnett as far as achievement wise, because you look at the defensive teams, you look at the All NBA teams. He just made another first team this year. And I know I kind of put you on the spot and we don't have everybody's numbers in front of us, right? But I'm already on that Kevin Garnett vibe right now. And even if he, like you mentioned in New Orleans, if he never did anything and just like had great numbers and was, just one of the best power forwards of his generation, but never won a ring, I'm feeling like a Charles Barkley type area with him. So, but already at 27 years old for us to be putting him in such rare air is crazy to me. He reminds me of so much of Kevin Garnett because he can do everything on the court. He can handle the ball. He can defend. He can shoot and, rebound. That's everything that Kevin Garnett did, right? I think that he's extremely versatile on both ends of the floor, and I liken him so much to Kevin Garnett for this generation. But Austin, for the last one, obviously, we talked about LeBron James already winning this ring, winning another Finals MVP. You already said that he's your GOAT. How much further does this ring put him past Michael Jordan in your eyes? Can you quantify that, or does it just kind of cement that he is just more of what you already felt coming into the game?
Personally, I don't know that it moves the needle in terms of how much further ahead of Michael Jordan that he is, because I don't know that that I don't really feel and see it in those terms. Like, I don't see that he's head and shoulders way above Michael Jordan, and he's not gonna be unless he wins 6 rings. So it's a step in the right direction. I just think, like I said, his overall total body of work, if you look in terms of who he's beaten, who he's played, yeah, he's lost 6 times, but other than that 2011 finals, look who he lost to. Like, like you've said, arguably the greatest roster ever assembled. And then to do it in 3 different places. Michael Jordan stayed with the same team, 3-peated twice, retired in between. All that was great. He had the same coach and the same co-stars for all of that. He had continuity on that roster. While he did have a lot of moving parts, but the important pieces were pretty much the same all the time. LeBron won with Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh. Then he won with Kyrie and Kevin Love. And now he's won with Anthony Davis. If he goes back to back with the Lakers, I think that'll do more to really, widen his lead. If he ends up with 6 titles and 6 finals MVPs, then I'll be the first to say I don't think Jordan would come close to him at that point. Because I don't think Jordan has much over him other than the scoring titles are great. The scoring titles, he does have that. And obviously he always will have that. But I think the only real argument that you can make at this point beyond that is 6-0 versus now 4-6, and the more rings and the more finals MVPs. If he ties Jordan while also going to twice as many finals, that just to me would be icing on the cake at that point. And I think that's what he wants. I think he wants to leave no doubt in anyone's mind who the greatest player of all time is. And I think he's turned a lot of people towards that direction already, thinking that way. And, there's a lot of people like you that, I respect your opinion, and you're a logical NBA, analyst and thinker. And, what you say about him needing to win one more, I'm okay with that. That to me, I can understand that. I think a lot of people kind of feel that way. But to say that he will never pass Michael Jordan and could never possibly be the GOAT is just, it's not realistic to me at this point. And, people say he's not even the best player in the NBA anymore. And there was arguments that, Kawhi was better than him at this point, or Kevin Durant. And Kevin Durant did give him the business in the finals.
Kevin Durant at one point was probably the closest thing to being better.
Look at it like this. And, it does have a lot to do with the way they construct the roster around what LeBron wants. But when OKC lost Kevin Durant, what'd they do the next year? They made the playoffs. When every team that LeBron has left, they've completely fallen off, after that.
There's kind of that whole, like I mentioned earlier,
that makes a difference. But he not only that, the first time he went to Miami and they immediately make the finals 4 straight times. Then he leaves Miami. Miami doesn't, falls off to an extent. I don't know for sure that they didn't make the playoffs, but obviously not a contender for the title anymore. And he goes to a Cleveland team that's never gotten out of the first round, immediately in the finals 4 more times.
Correct.
Then he leaves, and Cleveland's a dumpster fire. Granted, everybody but left, and Kevin Love was hurt.
Yeah, and Kyrie had left before him, and
there's extenuating circumstances. But I've yet to see, and we'll see it this next year, if Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving go make it to the NBA Finals in their first year in Brooklyn. Then we can talk, and this discussion will be a little bit closer in my mind. Sure. But I've never seen anything like it, where a guy, wherever he goes, is automatically either the favorite or a contender for the title, the way LeBron is. And it's just, he's the best player in the world. He's the best player alive currently, active player. I mean, And to me, this does a lot to change the narratives on social media and maybe, shut some of the haters up for a little while, at least long enough to take a breath. But
Sure.
in terms of overall real, where he sits for me, and I think in a lot of people's minds, it does help, but I don't think it changed anything for me. He was already where he was. And I think 5, 6, and if ever somehow beyond that makes a lot more difference than 4.
Yeah, absolutely. And, obviously alluded to this earlier. I felt that one more, I think a repeat would put him there for me right now. It's still, there are more than just the scoring titles that point in MJ's favor, other than 2 3-peats also, being named the best defensive player in any year, like, to me, I think that speaks to him both sides of the ball, right? When you can win MVP and defensive player of the year, like, that's insane. And then also be finals MVP too. That's just that's rare air, right? But I think that narrowing the gap in rings obviously does help. And I don't want to dwell on this a whole lot because I know that this conversation has been out there much, specifically with LeBron. I felt like it would be, a healthy mental exercise to see like where our standings would be with, like how we mentioned Coach Spoelstra, Jimmy Butler, Dwight Howard, Rajon Rondo, and where Anthony Davis already stacks up as far as all-time power forwards already at 27 years old is nuts.
Right. Hey, real quick about that. We were talking about having the numbers in front of us. Right now, currently all-time Anthony Davis's points per game is 22nd. And of all the guys we talked about, Karl Malone is the only one ahead of him, and it's by less than a point per game. And really the only other power forward that's even up there is Bob Pettit, who averaged almost 27 a game. He's like 8th all time. So, he's already above in terms of per game averages, all those guys we really talked about. So it's
not leaving anything off on the defensive side of the ball either. Right. And
a lot of people say he should have been the defensive player of the year this year.
Yeah. And you can even look, and that I disagreed with that. Right. But there's obviously a case to that. But ultimately, adding a ring, looking at those points per games, you could imagine even moving forward with this Lakers team that his points per games may go up, because even though LeBron James still looks like LeBron James a little bit, you have to think at some point he's going to, decrease.
I think LeBron James wants Anthony Davis to take that role and be the leading scorer and be the 30-point a game or close to it guy that I think a lot of people think he could be every night.
Yeah, because that saves LeBron James for to exert all of his effort in the playoffs, right? So maybe give you, every 5th game he comes out and has a big LeBron James, defining game. But, I think that is extremely possible. I'm looking forward to this offseason, and moving forward, we're going to do a bunch of great shows as far as, the draft and, who went where and who we like coming into the next year. But Austin, this was a great episode. I really appreciate you coming on and going through this with us here. Yeah, man. As always, it's always a good day when I get to link up with you, man, and talk shop. Sure. But before we close out, do you got anything that you want to kind of promote for Game Change Sports?
Yeah, I just posted an article this morning about, a little recap of the whole season and how, in my personal opinion, if you're going to put an asterisk in a record book next to this year, that asterisk better be because it was arguably the toughest title to win. And, you can say what you want about the bubble being pickup basketball or lack of travel or no fans. But at the end of the day, the Lakers were the number 1 seed. They got the home court advantage taken away from them. Yeah. And, and at the end of the day, overcoming, especially the fact that the Lakers won this title, overcoming the loss of Kobe Bryant in the middle of the season, overcoming a pandemic, overcoming a 4-month shutdown, overcoming the social injustice issues, having almost 4 months locked in a bubble away from your home. And for part of that time, their families were allowed to be there, but I don't think LeBron had his whole family there. He might have, but regardless, you don't have your friends or your network around you, your support system. You can't go home and sleep in your own bed and all that. And
you're playing every other night. You're playing every 2 days.
Right. There's no rest. There's no back-to-backs, but there's no rest. There's no travel, but there's a day off in between every game. That's it. And everybody's focused on basketball. There's no real distractions. So I personally feel that this is arguably the toughest title that's ever been won, the hardest season ever to win a championship. It doesn't mean it counts any more than any other, but it's just kind of the counterpoint to the idea that this was easier because it was, hard scrimmages, I think, as Scottie Pippen called it, or, anything like that.
Yeah. Well, and Scottie Pippen has definitely said some things that kind of leave his credibility as anything other than just being a Hall of Fame basketball player kind of up in the air. He's
and a lot of guys, that's all they really should, their credibility should be, because like we talked about last time, these guys are the most competitive people in the world. They always have been. It doesn't change when they retire. They're still competitive, and they're always going to say, oh, my era was tougher, or find some reason why this wasn't as hard as what they did, or this wasn't as great as what they did, because in their minds, they always have to be the best.
And Isaiah Thomas will not even say Michael Jordan in a conversation about being the greatest of all time.
It's so just petty and ridiculous. It's great, though. I love watching it.
Yeah, because, just like anybody else, players have an agenda, and they want to push a certain narrative that helps their cause or their era, as opposed to what we're actually witnessing now, right? So good talk, good conversation, and I'm sure that we're going to kind of have more of these moving forward. For you watching now or later, and those of you listening now or later, really appreciate the support, really appreciate, Robbie coming in and saying what's up, my buddy Drake.
Yeah, I love that. I appreciate all the comments. That made it a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Yeah. It keeps us going, and that's what we do this for. The show, is going to be available wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at BTG NBA Pod. There we go. And it's going to be a good time. Really appreciate all the love and support. Go check out all the great stuff that Austin and his colleagues are doing at Game Change Sports Network. Check out all that I'm doing and my colleagues are doing at offtheballnetwork.com. And we will catch up with you guys next time. Much love, everybody.
Have a good one.